He was feared by all, a cold, rigid and relentless boss. No one dared to challenge him within that Lagos mansion, but everything changed on a festive night when the new maid, young, humble and marked by injustices, dived into the pool without a second thought to save the family's dog. What seemed like a mere accident would become the spark of a web of secrets, betrayals and twists, capable of forever transforming the heart of the city's most unapproachable man. Amarachi arrived at the mansion on a sultry Lagos afternoon, carrying a small faded fabric suitcase and a heart heavy with uncertainties. The wide street leading to the main gate seemed endless, lined with trees casting long shadows on the asphalt. The taxi that brought her stopped in front of the imposing wrought iron entrance, where the Obinna family crest gleamed under the golden sun. As she stepped out, her eyes got lost in the vastness of the estate, a perfectly manicured garden, fountains choreographing water in precise patterns and servants hurrying back and forth. In that moment, the weight of the change in her life hit her like a hammer. She stood before a world that wasn't hers, but one she had to face. Her first impression of the mansion was the silence. Despite the bustle of the staff, there was a rigid atmosphere, as if everyone carried an invisible burden. Whispers sliced through the air almost imperceptibly, with everyone careful not to overstep in gestures or words. Amarachi quickly realized that discipline wasn't just expected, it was enforced like law. This sense of rigidity twisted her stomach, bringing back memories of her previous job, where she was humiliated and accused of a crime she didn't commit. The fear of reliving that story haunted her with every step she took down the long marble corridor. When she was introduced to Obinna by the housekeeper, the impact was immediate. The man who greeted her didn't need to raise his voice to command respect. His dark grey suit fit his athletic frame impeccably, his shoes shone like mirrors, and his cold, calculating gaze seemed to pierce through skin and scrutinize the soul. He didn't smile or make any effort to soften his demeanor. He merely nodded, as if the presence of a new maid was irrelevant compared to his multi-million-dollar business dealings. That absence of human warmth wasn't just noticeable, it was suffocating. In that moment, Amarachi understood why everyone spoke of him as the relentless one. Yet, despite that aura of hardness, there was something else. Something that didn't go unnoticed by keen eyes. The emptiness behind Obinna's expression was striking, though carefully hidden beneath layers of power and authority. He moved with confidence, but his face hinted at a loneliness no one dared to name. Amarachi, still in her humble position, recognized this detail because she knew the silence of invisible wounds. It was like looking at someone surrounded by luxury, yet chained by emotional shackles. This realization didn't bring comfort, but sparked a quiet curiosity about the man behind the reputation of toughness. On her first night, as she entered the simple room reserved for the staff, she set her suitcase on the narrow bed and sighed deeply. There was no room for complaints. The mansion's high ceilings hid secrets she didn't yet know, and every corner breathed history. As she carefully folded her few clothes, she recalled her mother's words. "Dignity isn't in where you sleep, but in how you rise each day." That memory became her strength, an invisible shield against others' judgment. She knew she was there to prove to herself that she could start over, even if the scars of the past lingered. The next morning, she got her first taste of the household routine. The dining table, set for 12, stood grand even when only Obinna sat to eat. The aligned cutlery, the immaculately pressed tablecloth, the aroma of fresh coffee, it all felt rehearsed, like a performance where every detail was calculated to maintain perfection. Amarachi observed in silence, careful not to move beyond what was necessary. When the boss entered the dining room, all the servants instinctively lowered their eyes in an almost ritualistic gesture. She did the same, but still felt the weight of his heavy gaze on her, as if he were measuring her without a single word. Curiously, Obinna's reputation for coldness wasn't just the staff's opinion. It was a rumor that spread through the city. In markets and streets, people whispered that he had no compassion, that he fired employees without hesitation, that his word was law. Some said his behavior stemmed from old family disappointments. Others believed it was simply the effect of poorly managed wealth on his heart. The truth, however, was that no one truly knew the secrets locked in that guarded heart. This air of mystery only heightened the contrast between the grandeur of the empire he'd built and the emptiness that cast a shadow over his home. While cleaning one of the corridors that morning, Amarachi crossed paths with the housekeeper who whispered, Don't expect kindness. He doesn't look anyone in the eye for long. The warning felt more like survival advice than criticism. Indeed, with every step through the corridors, she felt like she was treading on ground where one wrong move could cost everything. Yet, something urged her to stay, an inner voice whispering that perhaps here she'd find not just a livelihood, but answers to questions she'd carried since her unjust dismissal. At night, lying on the narrow bed, she looked out the window at the city lights in the distance. Lagos never slept, but the mansion was cloaked in absolute silence. She thought about how life could change in mere hours, from unemployed, unsure where her next meal would come from, to a servant in one of the city's wealthiest homes. The contrast was almost cruel, but it also carried the promise that something new could emerge. Her heart, torn between fear and hope, beat rapidly, as if sensing that this story was far from ordinary. Fate had already planted its seeds in that first encounter, a young woman marked by emotional scars, and a boss hardened by life, bound by the same house but separated by a chasm of class and pain. With every moment, Amarachi grew convinced that the mansion wasn't just a workplace, but a stage about to reveal scenes that would change her path forever. What she didn't yet know was that, beneath Obina's relentless facade, lay a heart on the verge of being challenged by the unexpected courage of the new maid. In the heart of the mansion, power and loneliness walk hand in hand. Amarachi has already sensed that Obina carries invisible wounds, but what will happen when these worlds collide? Find out with us on African Village Story. Turn on notifications and don't miss the next twist in this fate. The night was illuminated by crystal chandeliers and candles glowing on every table. The mansion exuded sophistication, with soft music filling the corridors and guests flaunting vibrant, expensive attire. Amid restrained laughter and clinking glasses, an air of ostentation reigned. But the sudden silence that swept through the room didn't come from the music stopping. It came from the desperate barking of the family's dog, who ran aimlessly and slipped into the shimmering blue pool. Shock rippled through the crowd like electricity, everyone holding their breath as the animal thrashed in the water. The guests, despite their wealth and power, stood frozen. Expensive shoes couldn't get wet, long dresses couldn't be ruined, and no one dared risk their image amid so many judgmental eyes. In that moment, Amarachi, without a second thought, dropped the tray she was carrying and ran toward the pool. Her leap shattered the formality of the party. The splash echoed like a shout, contrasting with the murmurs of the crowd. Initial shock gave way to intense whispers. The new maid had jumped into the pool, fully clothed, in front of curious and malicious eyes. As the dog struggled, Amarachi swam with determined strength. Her curly hair clung to her face, her simple dress weighed her down in the water, but her will to save the animal spoke louder. Every movement was watched by stunned expressions around the pool. Some guests whispered that such boldness would come at a cost. Others silently admired her rare courage. The scene wasn't just about saving a dog. It was about breaking the invisible wall between classes, where a humble young woman dared to act while the powerful merely watched. In the midst of that tension, something unexpected happened. Obina, so known for his coldness and absolute control, stood motionless. The businessman who dominated boardrooms, million-dollar deals, and even his staff's posture couldn't take a step. It was as if the pool's reflection illuminated not just the struggling animal, but a void within him, revealing his inability to react in a simple situation. His eyes, fixed on the scene, reflected a mix of surprise and unease. For the first time, the relentless man seemed vulnerable in front of everyone. When Amarachi emerged with the dog in her arms, soaked, trembling, and breathless, an absolute silence fell over the party. The panting animal shook its head as she set it down safely. Her heavy breathing contrasted with the guests' immobility, who didn't know whether to applaud, criticize, or pretend nothing had happened. But one detail didn't go unnoticed: Obina's fixed gaze. There was no anger, no disdain. There was something new, almost indescribable, as if that scene had melted years of ice in mere seconds. The party, once marked by ostentation, became a stage for invisible tension. Who could have expected a maid to become the night's protagonist? Amarachi's courage didn't just save the dog, it sparked questions, challenged hierarchies, and drew a spark of humanity from the boss everyone deemed untouchable. The question lingering in the air was inevitable. What would come after such an improbable act? Would you have the courage to jump into the pool in front of everyone just to save your boss's dog? Share in the comments. The water dripped from Amarachi's simple dress as she emerged with the dog in her arms. The animal trembled but was alive, and her panting breath filled the silence that overtook the party. The room, once dominated by laughter and ostentation, now bowed to an unexpected act. It wasn't just the courage to save the boss's dog that drew attention, but the naturalness with which she threw herself into the risk without hesitation. The scene made it clear there was an inner strength greater than any social etiquette. All eyes turned to the drenched maid who dared to do what no one else had the courage to. As Amarachi set the dog down, it ran to the carpet, shaking off water and wetting some of the guests. Awkward giggles arose, but no one dared comment aloud. The focus was on her, the young woman with delicate features and curly hair plastered to her face by the water's weight. Her chest heaved for air, yet even before the incredulous crowd, her posture remained upright, almost defiant. It was as if, without realizing it, she had claimed a space never granted to her. Her act transformed her image in the mansion into something greater than just a maid. In that moment, Amarachi raised her eyes and met Obina's gaze. The exchange lasted mere seconds, but was enough to reveal a crack in the wall he'd built around himself. His rigid expression, used to commanding and intimidating, gave way to something rare, a spark of gratitude, an emotion long buried in his heart. That silent exchange was almost an electric shock in the air, a contrast between her vulnerability and his power. The crowd, still uncomprehending, sensed that something beyond the rescue had just unfolded before them. Obina maintained his composure. He didn't smile, didn't approach, didn't utter a word. Pride, his faithful ally for years, wouldn't allow displays of humanity, but his eyes betrayed an invisible transformation. That moment exposed a fascinating contradiction. A man feared by all, frozen in the face of danger, and a young woman underestimated by many, who risked everything for a dog that wasn't hers. Though brief, this contrast would be etched in the memory of those present as an unforgettable episode. After all, even the hardest armors can crack before unexpected acts. That night, Amarachi didn't just save a pet. Unintentionally, she also saved something long dead in her boss, the capacity to feel gratitude. His gaze was no longer the same, though he tried to hide it, and that detail would forever change their relationship, opening a breach that even pride couldn't seal for long. What began with a dive into the pool became the prelude to a story pitting power against emotion in an inevitable duel. In the days following the party, something shifted in the mansions. Silent corridors. Obina, used to ignoring the faces of his staff, began noticing Amarachi's every gesture. The way she bowed to greet the older employees, the discreet smile she offered the gardeners, and the attentive care she put into every corner of the house didn't escape his watchful eye. The coldness that had always served as his shield now clashed with small displays of humanity from her. It was as if the image of her drenched in the pool had planted an uncomfortable seed, impossible to uproot. One morning, crossing the garden, Obina saw Amarachi crouched near a flower bed. It wasn't her job to tend the garden, yet she delicately removed dried leaves, as if understanding that even the smallest detail had value. The dog, even more attached since the rescue, ran around her in joyful circles, wagging its tail. That simple, almost mundane scene stirred something unexpected, the realization that a person's worth isn't measured by their position, but by how they treat what's entrusted to them. The businessman who controlled millions now found himself intrigued by a simple act of care. The staff began whispering discreetly. Some murmured in the corridors that they'd never seen Obina pay such attention to anyone. There was something different in how his eyes followed her, though he tried to mask it. Amarachi, meanwhile, seemed oblivious, maintaining her work rhythm as if her only mission was to fulfill her duties. But every time she tended to the dog or quietly fixed details, the memory of the party night flashed in her boss's mind. Not just her courage in diving in, but the naturalness with which she faced the situation. That echo of the recent past became a constant reminder that there was more strength in simplicity than he'd ever admitted. One night, alone in his office, Obina relived the pool scene as if it were a slow-motion film. The water splashing on the guests, Amarachi's soaked dress clinging to her body, the dog in her arms, everything mingled with the sense of helplessness he felt for not reacting. The relentless man who closed deals without blinking had stood still, while the young woman many saw as just a maid had thrown herself into danger without hesitation. That memory wounded his pride, but also illuminated a forgotten part of his soul. The question lingered in silence: who was truly the stronger one that night? What troubled him most was the repetition of details. No matter how many contracts he signed or meetings he concluded, there was always a moment when Amarachi's image resurfaced in his memory. It was as if her every gesture, however small, echoed beyond the domestic routine. Obina tried to convince himself it was mere gratitude, but deep down, he knew something greater was growing, a curiosity that broke through pride and an admiration he could no longer ignore. This mix of feelings marked the start of an internal conflict that would change everything. Sometimes the least expected people show us true value. Have you ever experienced something like this? Share in the comments. Amarachi's past wasn't something she shared easily. There were pains she preferred to lock away, not out of shame for who she was, but for the cruelty of being targeted by a lie capable of destroying reputations. The theft accusation from a politician's wife had not only cost her previous job, but spread like wildfire, leaving a mark that seemed impossible to erase. Back then, neighbors and acquaintances who once greeted her began avoiding her gaze, and doors that could have opened to new opportunities slammed shut. It was a weight she carried in silence, trying to survive in a world that cared little for hidden truths. That secret, however, didn't stay buried long. One of the mansion's security guards, in a hushed conversation with colleagues, mentioned what he'd heard on the streets of Lagos. That girl worked in an important house and left with a bad reputation. In an environment ruled by rigid hierarchies, the information quickly reached Obina's ears. The meticulous businessman never ignored such details. He ordered a deeper investigation into the story, like someone checking a crack before it compromises the foundation of their home. Upon hearing the reports, something began to nag at him. The dismissal story had too many holes. Why would a young woman with such a dedicated demeanor, with such careful gestures toward everyone around her, commit such a risky theft? Why had such a serious accusation never turned into an official case? The pieces didn't fit, and the conviction that always guided the businessman wavered. It was as if the image of Amarachi, drenched in the pool, saving the family's dog, clashed with the portrait of a thief someone had painted. That contrast fueled a doubt that wouldn't let him rest. In the solitude of his office, Obina allowed himself to reflect on the weight of injustice. How many lives had been destroyed by rumors planted by the right people at the right time? In Nigeria, such stories were all too common. Employees sacrificed to protect the honor of powerful families, accusations fabricated to cover secrets. Amarachi seemed to be another such case, and realizing this stirred a rare indignation in him. The thought that he'd hired someone by chance, unaware of the burden she carried, shifted his perception of who truly lived under his roof. Deep down, the episode served as a mirror. Obina, used to controlling narratives and reputations, understood the power of a rumor. He knew a single word spoken at the wrong time could ruin entire careers. Now, faced with Amarachi's story, he was forced to question his own judgment, and more than that, to recognize that he might have been unfair in many instances to people who never had the chance to explain themselves. It was an uncomfortable but unavoidable thought. That night, before sleep, the image haunting him was no longer just the pool dive. It was Amarachi walking silently through the corridors, head held high, carrying an invisible weight few could bear. Obina understood, albeit quietly, that the young woman wasn't just an employee. She was someone who resisted every day against a system that tried to crush her. And that recognition, though he tried to hide it, planted a seed of respect he never imagined he'd cultivate. Did Amarachi's injustice anger you too? I want to read your thoughts in the comments. Chiamaka was always known in the family for her boundless ambition. Obina's cousin, accustomed to effortless luxury, had long coveted control over part of the inheritance that sustained the mansion. To her, Amarachi was nothing but an inconvenient threat, an intruder daring to occupy an emotional space beside the family's most powerful man. The mere fact of noticing Obina's eyes on the maid made her seethe with rage. In Chiamaka's mind, this was unacceptable, and when an obsession with control meets the fear of losing privilege, a dangerous poison is born. In the corridors lit by crystal chandeliers, she watched Amarachi in silence, like a predator studying its prey. Every kind gesture from the young woman felt like a provocation, Every smile offered to the staff seemed a challenge. It didn't take long for Chiamaka to decide to act. After all, in Nigeria's influential families, reputations were worth more than contracts, and nothing ruined someone's image faster than a theft accusation. If Amarachi had already carried that burden in the past, reigniting the flame of suspicion would make everyone believe it again. The plan was crafted in secret. In her lavish room, Chiamaka opened one of the velvet boxes holding necklaces inherited from her grandmother, rare jewels worth thousands of dollars. She chose eye-catching pieces, easily recognizable anywhere in the house. In the dead of night, taking advantage of the reduced staff activity, she slipped into Amarachi's room. Her heart raced, not from fear of being caught, but from the dark thrill of believing she was shaping someone else's fate with her own hands. She hid the jewels in a drawer beneath the maid's simple clothes and left with the coldness of someone who had rehearsed it in her mind dozens of times. The next morning, Chiamaka began setting the stage for the discovery. In subtle conversations with relatives, she hinted that something strange had been happening in the house since the new employee's arrival. Her words were carefully chosen, always planting doubt, without revealing the source. That's the power of intrigue. It doesn't need immediate proof, just a well-placed insinuation. Soon, the idea that Amarachi wasn't as innocent as she seemed began circulating among the family's closest guests. The trap was ready to be sprung at a dinner. With everyone gathered at the table, Chiamaka would make a show of the discovery. Her goal wasn't just to tarnish Amarachi's image, but to expose Obinna in front of others, forcing him to choose between loyalty to the family and defending a mere maid. To her, the outcome was obvious. Her cousin would yield to pressure, and Amarachi would be expelled from the mansion under disapproving glares. What Chiamaka didn't anticipate was that Obinna's pride had already begun to waver, and the spark of doubt in his heart could turn into unexpected protection. The atmosphere in the house was about to shift. Amid polished cutlery and expensive wines adorning the dinner, a carefully laid trap lurked. Amarachi, unaware of the plot growing in the shadows, went about her routine with serenity, serving dishes with her usual dedication. The contrast was brutal. As she placed food on the guests' plates, believing she was merely doing her duty, someone had already condemned her without a trial. With every silent step, the invisible rope of betrayal tightened around her neck. Chiamaka waited for the perfect moment. She let the dinner progress, let the forced laughter of relatives mask family tensions, let the glasses be raised in fleeting toasts. When everyone seemed comfortable, she stood theatrically, clutching her necklace as if noticing something amiss. Feigning surprise, she announced that some family jewels had vanished from her room. The room erupted in immediate murmurs, accusing glances crossing the air, until Obinna's cousin demanded with a firm voice that everyone join in the search. The stage was set, and the scene of humiliation would be the maid's room. The group headed to the small space where Amarachi rested. The door was opened before everyone, as if her privacy meant nothing. Chiamaka, leading the scene, rummaged through drawers with the conviction of someone who already knew what she'd find. In seconds, she held up the inherited gold necklace, displaying it to the crowd as undeniable proof. The shock on the guests' faces seemed to seal the employee's fate. Once again, the label of thief fell on her shoulders, but this time, something different hung in the air. Something beyond the manipulator's control. Obinna watched everything in silence, with the impassive expression he used in business meetings. Inside, however, his heart waged a battle. The scene echoed the injustice he'd uncovered in Amarachi's past. Was it a coincidence that the same type of accusation surfaced again? The relentless boss, used to trusting only facts, noticed the puzzle pieces fitting together too suspiciously. The memory of Amarachi's courage, diving into the pool to save the family's dog, spoke louder than any jewel displayed before the crowd. The guests awaited his reaction, certain he'd confirmed Chiamaka's version. But Obinna didn't rush. He called for calm, suggested checking the mansion's cameras before jumping to conclusions. His controlled tone hid a decision already made within. He wouldn't let a cowardly trap destroy someone who'd shown more character in a single act than many relatives had in a lifetime. What was meant to be Amarachi's end was about to become the start of a revelation that would turn the tables on Chiamaka herself. And in that tense, heavy silence, everyone realized the night's outcome wouldn't be as predictable as it seemed. The game of power, inheritance, and pride was just beginning, and the masks would fall far sooner than the conspirators expected. Have you ever seen someone set such a cruel trap out of envy? Share in the comments. The dinner began steeped in formality, as always in Obina's family gatherings. The long table, adorned with silver candlesticks and porcelain plates, was as much a symbol of power as of tradition. Restrained laughter circulated between sips of wine, but the atmosphere carried something dense, almost imperceptible, as if everyone awaited an announced spectacle. Chiamaka, sitting upright with a disguised smile, seemed eager to light the fuse of the bomb she'd prepared. Her gaze didn't linger on any guest. It was fixed on Amarachi, like someone waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by an accusation thrown like a dagger. Chiamaka stood before everyone and declared that family jewels had vanished. She feigned surprise, feigned indignation, but every word carried a staged certainty. The suggestion that Amarachi was responsible fell like poison in the air. Murmurs spread instantly, suspicious glances turned to the young woman, and the weight of the accusation enveloped her like a net. It was the kind of situation where reputations are destroyed before evidence is even presented. Amarachi, standing still by the table, felt the ground tremble beneath her feet. There was no way to defend herself without seeming desperate, and the memory of her past injustice returned like a cruel shadow. Yet, her eyes showed no fear, only pain and disbelief. The injustice repeated itself before wealthy relatives, people accustomed to judging without ever putting themselves in another's shoes. The murmurs grew, some already whispering phrases that sounded like verdicts. It was the perfect scene for Chiamaka to triumph, but one detail would shift the night's course. Obina, who had been watching in silence, lightly tapped his hand on the table. The sound echoed through the room, silencing everyone. With a firm, cold voice, he ordered the security team to be called immediately. He demanded, before all, that the mansion's cameras be reviewed to uncover the truth. The decision caught Chiamaka off guard. Her confident expression faltered, though she maintained the mask of someone with nothing to fear. Amarachi, meanwhile, stood tall, her eyes fixed on her boss, as if seeing a thread of hope amid the chaos for the first time. Minutes later, the security team returned with the video in hand. The footage, projected for all to see, showed the clear scene: Chiamaka sneaking into the maid's room, opening the drawer, and hiding the jewels among her simple clothes. The silence that followed was deafening. The mask fell, and no argument could erase what everyone had seen. The room that had buzzed with accusations now sank into shame and shock. Each guest averted their gaze, avoiding the collapsing farce before their eyes. Obina rose slowly, his posture erect and his expression unshakable. He looked at his cousin with the coldness of someone severing blood ties without hesitation. Then, turning to Amarachi, he declared in a clear voice that she was not only innocent, but deserved respect in that house. It was an unprecedented gesture. The relentless boss, before family and guests, siding with the maid everyone had underestimated. The power of that moment wasn't just in the defense, but in the public recognition of a dignity no one had dared acknowledge before. Chiamaka tried to argue, but her voice wavered, betrayed by the images that exposed her. The family's silence wasn't one of support, but of veiled disapproval. What was meant to be a night of humiliation for Amarachi turned into a spectacle of downfall for the woman who tried to destroy her. The dinner ended not with toasts, but with a lesson etched in everyone's memory. The truth may take time, but when it arrives, no wall can contain it. The truth was revealed by the footage. Do you believe justice always comes in the end? Share below in the comments. Breaking ties with Chiamaka wasn't just a severing of family bonds, but a milestone in Obina's character. The man who for years cultivated a reputation for being relentless toward any fault now showed that injustice wouldn't be tolerated even within his own family. By declaring that his cousin was banished from his trust, the entire room realized his authority wasn't limited to power. It was beginning to align with justice. It was the first time anyone saw the impenetrable businessman act not out of convenience but integrity. This shift in stance made it clear that nothing in the house would ever be the same. Shortly after, before relatives and staff, Obina did something unimaginable. He apologized to Amarachi. The words were brief but carried immense weight. For a man who rarely admitted mistakes, acknowledging before so many eyes that he'd allowed doubts about someone innocent was almost revolutionary. the room's atmosphere shifted. The silence that followed the apology wasn't one of disapproval but of respect. Amarachi moved, lowered her head in humility, but everyone could see the contained glint in her eyes. An apology in that context was worth more than any wealth. In the days that followed, the mansion's dynamics changed. The icy barrier between boss and maid was gone. Obinna began speaking to Amarachi not as someone giving orders but as someone seeking to understand. Respect replaced distance, and conversations once unthinkable began happening in the corridors, garden, and even during meals. Employees who once followed strict protocols now witnessed a new relationship blooming. The house, which had always breathed rigidity, began to exude an unexpected air of humanity. The simple fact of Obinna asking about Amarachi's family or praising her attention to detail was seen as a sign of transformation. In this process, even the family dog gained new meaning. Once merely a status symbol, it now represented the invisible bond between them. Whenever Amarachi approached, the dog ran to her with uncontained joy, and it was impossible not to notice Obinna's gaze softening at the sight. The pool rescue was no longer just an isolated episode. It had become the starting point for a connection uniting such different lives. For the staff, each of the dog's gestures was like a silent reminder that, even in the coldest houses, unexpected bonds can form. What impressed most was how Obinna seemed different. His rigidity remained, but was now balanced by acts of consideration. Those who knew him long-term noticed a change in the glint of his eyes and the way he listened. The powerful businessman discovered that true leadership isn't built solely on orders, but also on the courage to admit mistakes and value those who deserve it. This transformation wasn't just personal, it was visible to all, and every detail made it clear that Amarachi had become a pivotal figure in his life. And so, what seemed impossible, a relentless boss yielding to the humanity awakened by an unjustly accused maid, began to take shape as reality. The mansion, once breathing silence and hardness, now harbored an unexpected flame, trust. And in stories like this, trust is the seed that inevitably grows into something greater. What's worth more, power without heart or humility that transforms? Share your thoughts below in the comments. Months passed since that night when masks fell and truths came to light. Life in the mansion was no longer the same, but the deepest changes weren't in the quieter corridors or less formal meals. They were in the hearts. Amarachi, who had arrived at the house marked by rumors and injustices, was now writing a new chapter in her story. With financial support from Obinna, she started a small catering business, but what truly sustained it wasn't the money. It was the talent and dedication she'd always carried. The dream that once seemed impossible began taking shape before eyes that once saw her only as a maid. The business started modestly, serving small neighborhood events. Amarachi herself handled every detail, choosing fresh spices at local markets, crafting menus blending Nigerian tradition with innovative touches, and ensuring each dish carried not just flavor but memory. The public quickly noticed the difference. It wasn't just food, it was an experience of care and affection. Soon orders multiplied, and her name began circulating in social circles once out of reach. Her story of overcoming stamped not just the dishes served, but every grateful look from delighted clients. Obinna watched this rise with a mix of pride and admiration. The businessman used to building empires with cold contracts now witnessed the birth of something far more valuable, a project built with passion. More than investing, he learned to step back, letting Amarachi own her story. This wasn't easy for someone accustomed to controlling everything, but the trust built between them made him realize the greatest gift wasn't in dictating paths, but in supporting from afar. It was proof that even the most rigid man can be transformed by the quiet impact of someone courageous. The dog, once again, became a symbol of this new phase. It was present at impromptu meetings, accompanied Amarachi on deliveries, and even appeared in promotional photos for the small business. Clients commented fondly on the story of the animal that, unwittingly, had united two distant worlds. It was curious how life, in seemingly trivial details, holds keys to unlocking entire destinies. What began as a desperate dive into a pool now solidified as a bridge to a new life. The streets of Lagos, once echoing cruel rumors about Amarachi, now whispered a different story. The young woman who rose after being wronged, The contrast was stark. People who once averted their gaze now greeted her with respect, and even neighbors who doubted her integrity sought her services. Her victory wasn't just professional, it was symbolic. It confirmed that truth can be stifled for a time, but always finds a way to breathe. And this change didn't go unnoticed by Obinna, who now saw his own power in a new light. For him, the transformation was even more intimate. The man who for years believed wealth was measured in mansions, luxury cars, and signed contracts realized none of that brought him peace. The true fortune stood before him: Amarachi's courage, the loyalty of someone who didn't give up despite injustice, and the trust that formed between them. More than partners in an improbable fate, they became life partners. The silence that once isolated Obinna was finally broken by something money can't buy: humanity. And so, what began as a relationship, marked by coldness and distance, transformed into a bond of overcoming and unexpected love. Amarachi found her voice, Obinna found his heart, and together they discovered that the greatest wealth isn't in accumulated possessions, but in the value of people who dare to change our story. For those watching from the outside, one truth remained: when truth and courage meet, even the most unlikely destinies can flourish. Some stories aren't about power, but about hearts, learning to rebuild in silence. Amarachi didn't win with cries of revenge, but with the strength of someone who carries dignity, even when the world tries to steal it. Obinna didn't change to impress, but because he understood that the greatest wealth isn't in a mansion's walls, but in the trust born from truth. Because when courage stands tall, even the tallest lie crumbles. New stories are on the way. Click the video below and experience the next emotion. Until then.